Okay, everyone, out of respect for your time, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the IRA seminar. And I want you guys to get really excited. First of all, I want you to do a simple applause for Anastasia. She helped me out today. I'm going to give a warm welcome. So I want you guys to get really excited, and I'll tell you why. There are two things we're sure of in life. What are those two things?
Death and taxes.
Exactly, death and taxes. Well, death, hey, death is what it is. We can't do anything about that. But what if we're able to do something about the taxes? What if we're able to keep more money in your pocket and less out of the government's pocket? Does that sound good? I think so. So, if you had to pick one particular thing, more than anything else in the world, what would the one factor be to growing your money? Go ahead, anyone? Any brave soul?
Investing.
Well, investing is the process, but what part of investing, what factor in investing do you think is more advantageous than anything else? Tax advantage. Tax advantage. The two magic words. It's not rate of return or the right investment or anything else. It's getting the opportunity when you invest to keep more money in your pocket from the get-go. So let's talk about what we're going to talk about today. What's the agenda? So we start with the very first question. Can you deduct an IRA? It used to be anyone can do it. Not the case anymore. We're going to discuss who can and who can't. Next, how do you withdraw from an IRA? How are they taxed when you withdraw? And how will it affect you guys in retirement? Roth IRAs. What the heck is a Roth versus a traditional IRA? Which is better? What's the difference? Traditional or Roth? Next, are the investments that you have within your retirement plan meant for growth or are they meant for income? What's the difference? The G versus the I. And then, should you do what's called a Roth conversion? Do you guys know what a Roth conversion is? We're going to talk about what it is, who can do it, and why you would do it, if at all. And finally, there's one point on here that we're not going to, that isn't even listed, that we're going to get into, and that's because I had several people ask me about this very fact in the last seminar. And that was, what are the changes in the tax bill? What's the plan? What's in the new tax bill for 2018? We'll talk about some of those highlights as a benefit feature, essentially, at the end if we have time. Does that sound like a good plan? Good. So before we begin, if you could do me a favor, put any food away. I just ask, just very distracting people during a presentation like this. It's only an hour. I guarantee you, if you're hypoglycemic, you can make it through the hour. Cell phones, you can do me a favor, just common courtesy, just mute your phones. If you have to take a call, I absolutely get that. If you don't mind just taking it outside, I really appreciate it. And finally, if we're going to have the questions held off until the very end, we used to take questions throughout the whole program, and there's a certain momentum that gets going when we do the seminar. So I want to maintain that momentum, and I've noticed the majority of the questions are usually answered throughout the course of the program, usually about 90% of the questions. So if you have a question, just do me a favor, write it down, and we'll go ahead and follow up at the end. I think we'll be able to cover more at that point. So this wouldn't be America if we didn't have some kind of legal disclaimer. Understand the information that we're discussing here today are all general concepts. They may or may not apply to your particular situation. So with that in mind, we will give you the opportunity, if you did want to speak with me on a one-on-one, you will have that opportunity, which we'll discuss in a minute. But understand that, again, these are basic concepts based on my personal experience, training, and education. So they may, again, or may not apply to you. So this evening, besides the water, we want to keep you well hydrated, right, along with the packet. We've given you a packet. In that packet, you have several contents. You should receive a pen, which is also a stylus, so if you break out the iPad, you can have fun with that. There's a map to our office, which is literally 2 minutes down the street by car, or 5 minutes if you're going to walk. We're in the Sun Breeze building, the Daily Breeze building, right down the way here, by the Del Amo Mall. And we've offered 2 business cards in the packet, so one's for yourself, and one if you want to pass on to a friend or family member that you think would need my help. I'd like you to pass it along if you found this valuable. We've given you a company brochure, so if you want to know more information about the firm, you can do that. And we've given you some scratch paper. If you want to take notes, that's how you can do it. Again, if you want to write the questions on that scratch paper, you're welcome to. And finally, we have something called the feedback form, which is also included in the packet. Now that feedback form is important for you as well as it is for me. It's important to me because we've been doing these seminars for quite some time now. We do Social Security seminars, general investing seminars, RMT seminars, you know. The IRA seminar is actually a relatively new seminar. It's essential for that reason that we get this back from you, every single one of you. We want to know what you like, what you didn't like, what worked, what didn't work, what you would change if you were doing this seminar. So again, it's very important we get your feedback. What's in it for you? We have cleared our schedule for the next 3 weeks for the opportunity if you did want to meet with me at no cost. We have to deal with the library. The meeting would be completely complimentary. While we would like to talk about IRAs, you can talk about anything that you want to talk about. You're not restricted to retirement accounts. But again, it's your hour. My goal is not to make you a client. I give you my word. I will not try to sell you on any services or products. It's your opportunity to come and meet with me. So a little bit about the firm. We've been around since '99. We have a radio show on 8:70 a.m. called the Providence Retirement Program. It's good that our name happens to be Providence Financial, otherwise we'd have to change that name. And you'll see we're an extensive collective member of a variety of different organizations to constantly keep abreast of the changes going on in not just the tax code, but in finance as a whole. And there's nothing that changes more rapidly, I've found. Maybe the medical field probably changes pretty rapidly, but short of that, financial investments, financial guidelines all change at a very rapid pace. We keep abreast of all of them. For that reason, we're a member of Dave Ramsey, we're a member of the National Ethics Association. We've been voted in the past as the #1 advisor in California by Forbes magazine. So we have a long standing in the community and great track record of success. You'll look on the BBB, we have a top rating. Yelp, we have 5 stars. So if you want to do your homework on us, I'd love to encourage you to just go on and Google us. You'll find a lot of great information on our firm. Now I get to talk about my favorite subject, myself. I am a financial advisor. I've been involved in finance since a wee young lad. My parents were economic professors, and they went on to run several top universities as the dean of the business school. My brother is a day trader, which we talk daily on different activities when it comes to stock trading. My grandfather ran a successful foundation, also was a big day trader in the market, and my uncle, also a big player in the market, was a successful entrepreneur. So I've done nothing since wee child, running around, learned nothing but information on finance, how to grow your wealth the slow and sure way, and to lead what will lead essentially to success, both for myself and you guys. So any questions you can have, I'd love you to play Stump the Monkey and take you up on that challenge, get the opportunity to answer some of your questions. I love it. I'm very passionate about it. And it's not just the money marking aspect I like. I love making my clients money. But more important, I love saving financial lives. And I can tell you that from my heart because I have dealt with every realm of person you can possibly imagine. People who are $90,000 in debt on up to multimillionaires on a daily basis. I've helped widows, divorcees, I've helped people of all walks of life. And I love saving, literally saving lives and helping them survive in challenging economic times and in good economic times. So I want to extend that offer to you guys to take advantage of the window of opportunity. So with that, let's jump right in and let's learn about IRAs. Now before we find out what an IRA is, let's talk about the history of IRAs. So IRAs didn't always exist. Before IRAs, we had something called pensions. And that all changed in 1974 with something called ERISA, the Retirement Income Security Act, back in 1974. And the purpose of this new piece of legislation wasn't to create IRAs. The creation of IRAs was simply a byproduct. The initial goal of this legislation was to help people with pensions. I'm relatively middle-aged, and I bet I can remember a little company called Studebaker. I'm looking out in the audience, I can see a lot of you probably remember a little car called Studebaker, a manufacturing company called Studebaker. Do I see show of hands? Everyone remember Studebaker? Is there anyone who doesn't remember Studebaker? Okay. Well, if I remember, you guys remember. And back in 1970, right before 1974, Studebaker, one of the most prominent manufacturing car companies, went out of business. And the people that worked there for 30 to 40 years were then, in some cases, stuck and weren't able, they didn't have the financing to fulfill the pension obligations. So that left a lot of people broke and unhappy. Congress stepped in doing so, created the 1974 Act, ERISA. Now again, it wasn't the idea to create these IRAs, it was actually incidental. But in doing so, it started a trend. Does anyone know what that trend is? It's a lessening of an obligation. Once upon a time, the obligation of retirement used to be on the shoulders of the employer. That's changed. Who is that obligation now on? Exactly. It's all you guys. Even more reason, now more than ever, it's important you communicate with a financial advisor or a financial professional who knows what they're doing, who's done it time and time again, who can navigate you through the choppy waters, as I should say. With that, we saw the invention of the IRA, and with the IRA, you started off with $1,500, which you could contribute to. Now that changed in 1981, and we had something called IRTA, which is basically restricted in some cases the functionary aspects of the IRA. But on a better, happier note, it did give you higher thresholds. So you went from $1,500 to $2,000, and we like that. Anyone want to guess what they are today? Does anyone know? Sir, brave soul? What do you think they are?
6,500.
Very good. If you're under the age of 50, it's 5,500, and we'll talk about the catch-up in a second. Now, something that's not on the slide, I want to veer away from it for a second. The Obama administration started something called the fiduciary rule, wherein when anyone handling a retirement account must be a fiduciary. It's a rule I am very happy for. I think it's something that should happen a long time ago. And I'm all for it. And again, to be able to handle and work with retirement accounts, you have to be a fiduciary. And that's enforced by the Department of Labor. Now, be very careful, because there are a lot of financial professionals out there who don't act as a fiduciary. It's not required in some cases by law if you're not handling retirement accounts specifically. People like stockbrokers, maybe insurance salesmen. So just be aware that if you do work with a professional, make sure they're a fiduciary. I've been a fiduciary before. It was required, as has my firm. So rest assured you're in good hands. What does it mean to be a fiduciary? You have to put the client's needs before your own. And we have to be able to justify anything we say to a judge and or auditor. So just so you guys know, our firm was audited last year randomly. We passed with flying colors. So be happy to know we practice what we preach. We don't want to give you what we think is good advice, but the best possible advice we could possibly offer. So before we get into this slide and talk about tax deferrals, let's talk about what is an IRA on a very basic concept. So an IRA is quite simple. A lot of people don't know this. You'd be surprised how many clients come in and don't understand the principle. But imagine if you have a box, right? That box is the IRA account. You have to put assets in the box. Those assets can be stocks, bonds, precious metals, even real estate, although we don't recommend that. So is that clear for everybody? Okay, we're seeing some people nod, some people look kind of dazed. You can't get too confused this early because there's a lot more, it's a little bit more complicated. So as an IRA account, the IRA account in itself is not an investment. It's a box where you put the investments in the box. And when you're changing things around, you can change things around in the box. You're not restricted to, you don't pick and then set and forget and you're stuck there. You can move things around within the box and not have to worry about necessarily tax repercussions. And that's another advantage of having your assets within an IRA like that. Now, that's in a very nutshell, that is what an IRA account is. So let's break it down in terms of categories. So if we look at categories, quite simply, there's Roth and there's everything else. So what does everything else include? Well, the everything else category can be broken down into two different types. There's the personal and plans through your employer. With the personal accounts, you're looking at things like your traditionals, your you have things like simples, you have SEPs, and you have KEO plans, which you don't see very much of very often. I actually saw a client came in the other day, well, someone I met with before came in about a week or two ago. We had a KEO plan. I felt like I was seeing an old friend. I haven't seen one of those in so long. But those are your personal plans, right? Then you have your work sponsored accounts. Those are your 401ks. you have your 403Bs, and you have your 457s. Any questions on that so far? Okay. So within these categories, and everything else, you have the Roth. So what is the difference between these two categories? A Roth is post-tax dollars. That means you've already been taxed on the money before it goes in. The benefit to having post-tax dollars is the fact that the interest and dividends are completely tax-free. We like tax-free. On the other side, we have everything else. Those are deferred plans, meaning, and you'll see very closely, very carefully, very quickly, that the IRS looks at things very differently than we do. You know, we see it as the hard work. We've put our, sweat of our brow. We've put our oomph into our job. We made the money. We think it's ours, right? Well, the IRS doesn't see it that way. The IRS sees it as a loan. For those of you who have a 401k or traditional, who love being debt-free, did you know you actually have a loan? The government is essentially giving you a loan. The government sees it differently. They say, well, you've made your money, but we can tax you on it, but no, we'll let you hang on to it for a little while longer. We'll let it grow, right? Completely tax-free. You can get the compounding interest, you'll get the dividends, the interest, and one day, way down the line, it's going to come time to pay the piper. That time is 70 and a half. We'll get to that. It's called RMTs, required minimum distribution. We'll talk about more. We'll talk about more of that later. But when you borrow from a loan, when you take a loan, eventually you have to pay it back. And that's essentially what's happening in the eyes of the government. So the question now is out there. Do you want to be taxed before or after, right? You want to get taxed on the chicken or the eggs? Well, the answer, quite simply, is it depends. It depends on your particular situation. It depends on a lot of factors. And we can talk about some of those factors if you choose to consider. But again, it's an issue whether you get taxed on the seed or the harvest. And there are pros and cons to each. We can go into detail. But let's talk about tax deferring for retirees. So, who here's a science fiction fan? Does anyone like science fiction? Okay. I'm a big science fiction geek, I'll tell you straight up. And I like something called alternative realities, right? Alternative dimensions, where maybe in this dimension, we're all humans, but in another dimension, maybe animals run the world, right? So let's take two different dimensions for the sake of this example. And let's say the first dimension is this, but we live in this reality. And another is, instead of taking your money and putting it in an IRA, you put it in a taxable brokerage account. Everyone with me so far? So if we put it in a tax-deferred account, you put it into your 401k, or let's say your IRA, traditional IRA, and you put $2,000 away over the course of 40 years. And we'll say that it's tax-deferred at 8%. Now, where do we get the 8%? Anyone know? Did I just pull that number out of the air? If you ask anyone on Wall Street, they're going to give you a general response in terms of how much you can expect to make if you put your money in the market. Anyone know what that number is? Usually 7 to 8%. Very good. Not a trick question. Usually they say 0 to 2% on income side, about 7 to 8% on capital appreciation. So that's where we get the 8%. Right? So if we calculate that, multiply that by 40 years, you're going to get just under $600,000. If we take that figure and we multiply that by 0.4, and I'll explain that in a second. That's the cash flow rule. We'll get to that in a second. That's going to give you $22,382 over that span. Now, where's that number coming from? 0.04, 4%. Where does that come from? Does anyone know?
The requirement of distribution?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I'll explain that in a second. So you're on the right path then. The cash flow rule comes from an assumption that you're in the right investments focused on income. And we're going to cover this more in detail later as well. But it's assuming that you're getting consistency in income where you're not going to have to dip in your portfolio and start cannibalizing your portfolio and eat into your principal, your nest egg. So that's assuming that you're calibrating all your investments properly. A big assumption, but one for the sake of the illustration we're going to stick with. So again, 22 grand, if you're invested properly per year, you can live off of with that amount. Now, in your alternative dimension, you decided to go more aggressive, you put it in a taxable brokerage account, and you don't really care so much about the income. Well, with that $2,000, it's not $2,000 because you're taxed on it. You're really putting in $1,400. And over the time of a period of 40 years, again at 8%, you're looking at a taxable return of $200,000, almost a third of that other figure. If you multiply that by 4, you're looking at $8,281. So you can see the benefit, as I mentioned before in the beginning, of tax advantage, the biggest benefit you can to keeping more money in your pocket and being able, essentially, in the long run, to generate more money off that income. So, we talked briefly about the IRAs. We talked about the traditionals. We talked about the Roths. Two important numbers you have to know when we talk about traditionals. The first one, 71.5. I mentioned that before. That's when you have to pay the piper, because there's no free ride. That's when the IRS requires you to take money out whether you want to or not, right? The other number you have to know is 59.5. And I'm gathering a lot of you don't have to worry about this, you're probably past that point. But at 59.5, you have an early penalty if you draw money, as much as 10% if you take early. Now, I have a lot of pet peeves I see when people make mistakes, not because it's their fault per se, they just didn't know. And I spoke to someone just yesterday, literally, who called me with some issues about trying to get out of debt. They had issues about wanting to invest, and they had a very small amount, but it was, for her age, I guess she had a decent amount in there. And she took the money out for spending and to cover credit cards and to pay rent. And that led to about another hour conversation explaining why that was a bad thing. If you guys are going to take notes, this is an important note. We want to keep as much money in your pocket and less money out of the government's pocket. They're going to get their money, we just want to give them less, legally, as much as possible. So again, we want to do what we can. Having your money in IRA is one of those things. Now, another number I want you to remember is age 50. And at age 50, you have something called a catch-up. And with that catch-up, you can donate $1,000 more, contribute $1,000 more to your IRA than you did before you were 50. So again, you can contribute $6,500 rather than $5,500. We like that. The more money we can stash away, the happier we're going to be, the more money we have at the end. So with Roths, we mentioned that before. Again, it's post-tax dollars, you're already taxed on money. The interest and dividends, tax-free. Next we have the third category, the simples and the SEPs. I'm not going to get too much into detail here because fewer people have these. These are meant for self-employed people, self-employed individuals. And people may like them because they have higher thresholds, as much as 50 grand in some cases. And again, if you have a SEP or a simple, come talk to me. We'll discuss how to take the money, what you've been doing, and how to best capitalize on this aspect. But again, less than 10% of the population has them. For that reason, we're going to kind of minimize the amount of time we spend on it just because there's a whole lot of content we have to get to outside of this. So yes, simple and SIMPs, again, for self-employed individuals. So we talked about contribution limits already, $5,500 and $6,500 if you're over age 50. Now here's the catch. To be able to contribute, you must have consistency in income. Alimony counts as income, very important factor. I talk to a lot of divorcees about that a lot, widows, divorcees, very important. We talk about things like quidros, which is neither here nor there, but you cannot contribute to an IRA, a traditional IRA, after the age of 7.5. And you cannot contribute to a 401k over the age of 70.5, with exceptions. That exception is, if you're still working there, you can push the time back. However, if you have other 401ks from other positions, you do have to draw on those. So this is a chart that will help you understand and quantify if you're already covered by a retirement plan at work, a 401k or 403b, can you contribute to a traditional plan? The answer is yes, but there are certain thresholds. You cannot make too much money, essentially. So what are those thresholds? So if you're single, head of household, one of the two, you're looking, if you're making combined $63,000 or less, or you're single making $63,000 or less, you can contribute, you can get a traditional. Now, the question usually presents itself, well, if I'm not making a lot of money, how will I be able to contribute? There's the irony, that's the catch. Some people, because they're not high earners, will not be able to contribute. However, the people that are high earners may not be able to contribute. And for that reason, the reason the IRS does that is because they want to make sure this is done as a retirement plan first and foremost. They don't want people tax sheltering for the sake of sheltering. So they're trying to cover the grounds. So if you're making 63 to 73, it's prorated, right? There's a sliding scale there. If you're making 73,000 or more, can't do it. There's just simply no deduction. Conversely, if you're married and filing jointly or a qualifying widower, you can make 101 or less, 101 to 121, partial deduction. If you're making over 121, you just can't do it. Finally, if you're married, filing separately, less than 10,000, you get a partial deduction. You just can't do it if you're making over 10,000. And you'll see with the other slides, not the best position if you're married and filing separately. So if you look at, if you're not covered with a plan at work, if you, let's say, have one spouse that's working with a plan and one that doesn't have a plan, yes, you can still contribute with some threshold limits. If you're single, head of household, any amount, you're good to go. Married, filing jointly, any amounts. If one of the spouses is not covered. Married, filing jointly, 186 or less. 186 or less, that's combined. Between 189 and 199, you get a partial deduction, again, prorated. 199 or more, no deduction. Again, the $10,000 limits for married and filing separately. So, these are actually the new tax brackets. I literally just replaced this a couple of months ago. So if you notice, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the tax brackets, but they actually changed that. Does anyone know what the old limit for the top tax bracket was? Does anyone know? For Gold Star? It used to be 39. It's been lowered to 37. The thresholds also changed. This is more along the lines for married, it's 600 now. Used to be 4 or something. I can have the chart later on. We can go over that if you're interested. So let's talk about the taxation system in America. To understand IRAs, you have to know a little bit about tax brackets, a little bit about how taxes happen in this system. So we live in what's called a progressive tax system. If you make, let's say, $100,000, all $100,000 is not taxed at, let's say, I don't know, 32 percentile, right? It's taxed for the first, let's say, $9,000, you're taxed at 12% income bracket, right? At 22, you're within that bracket, you're at 38, and then at 82 at the 24% bracket. So chunks of money are taxed differently as you go higher up. We usually refer to something as the marginal bracket, which is the top bracket. So if you're making, let's say, 180, then you're going to be between the 32 and the 35 percentile, or 32. Now, I had someone come to me and said they were in an 18% tax bracket. There's no such thing as an 18% tax bracket. That means they were given the information, they were collectively combined, that's how much in taxation they were basically paying. But there's no 18% tax bracket, it's just one of these 7. And I'm still getting used to the new tax brackets. So yeah, a lot of detailed information. And to understand where you are, this is the restrictions, right? This is when it comes in. You might be looking at this and saying, well, this isn't rocket science. I can probably figure out where my tax bracket is this. I mean, this last year, it's a no-brainer. Why do I need to see Alec? This is pretty easy, right? It's not rocket science. But the fact is, does anyone here know how Social Security came about? Does anyone know when it came about? Does anyone know a president who came up with Social Security, or his administration?
Is that Franklin Roosevelt?
Very good, FDR. FDR, after the Great Depression, came up with Social Security because he saw the people who worked very hard and broke their backs to build this great country should not be thrown out in the cold. They should be rewarded in some way for helping build the country, right? He looked around the time of the Depression, saw there was such a high unemployment rate, things were not going well. He wanted to rectify that and make sure it wouldn't happen again. So they created OASDI, which eventually became Social Security, known as Social Security. So FDR once had a pledge. It was one that everyone was excited about it. There were naysayers about Social Security from the beginning, and still are today. But he had one big pledge to the American population. Do anyone know what that pledge is? He said, Social Security will never, ever be taxed. Guess what happened in Ronald Reagan's? It was taxed. It was taxed to preserve the integrity to make sure we still have it later on. And yet still, Ronald Reagan was a very popular president. So those of you who are Democrats, who are smug saying, yeah, it's a typical Republican thing, guess what happened in Clinton's administration? It was taxed again. They raised the thresholds and went from 50 up to 50% taxation to up to 85% taxation. So the reason I'm mentioning this is because in some cases, when you this is all intertwined now. Your taxes, with your Social Security, with your Medicare, with your RMDs. Everything is intertwined, it's interwoven. So when you start, and the biggest issue I get, when people aren't familiar with this information and they're taken by surprise, they don't realize, when you start drawing your RMD, if you're still working, if you start taking your Social Security, it may bump you to a higher tax bracket, which could be the cause of more distress, because people usually plan under the assumption they're going to keep going in the same direction. And by the way, does anyone know as a rule of thumb, what do you generally budget for in retirement versus now? Do you know what percentage you generally need as a rule of thumb now versus when you retire? Does anyone know? What's the rule of thumb? They say usually 75%. They say whatever your overhead is now, once you retire, you'll usually need about 75%. Now people usually plan for that or something along those lines if they're working with a planner. And it's important that planner tells you that in some cases you could get knocked into another bracket. So you could be saying, again, I don't need to see Alec, I'm good to go, it's rocket science. But again, that could knock you into the other bracket. So when you start taking your RMDs. So let's talk more about these RMDs. The RMDs are for the government. They're going to tax you on it. And they've been very patient. They've been twiddling their thumbs. They've been waiting for you to age. And they say, boom, 70 and a half, it's time, bring it. And that's when you have to start giving a little bit of your paycheck over, right? Does anyone know how income is taxed with a traditional IRA through RMDs? Do you know how that's taxed? It's taxed as ordinary income. Now the reason that's important is because that's very different than if you're, in terms of the taxation side, if you're going into something like a taxable brokerage account, which if you hold for over a year and a day, you're looking at capital gains tax is usually much lower than ordinary income. Of course, that's going to depend on how much money you're making, what tax bracket you're in, but understand that that could throw things off, so be aware of that. Another reason you want to come see me or somebody else about that. So when do you take your RMDs? We talked about that already, 70 and a half, and usually it's April 1st after the year you turn 70 and a half. Now here's something that confuses a lot of people. Usually the IRS looks at what happens in your retirement account on December 31st of that year, right? So when you have to pay, you're looking at April's when you usually pay, so they look at December 31st, what your balance is in your accounts on December 31st. The first year you are required to take RMDs, you have the choice to do it in that year, or you can make 2 withdrawals in the second year. Now the question remains, which year, there are actually several